My name is Cora Dane. For most of my 28 years, I have felt more like a shadow than a person, a whisper in a house of declarative shouts. I grew up in Port Blossom, a town that clings to the coastline like a barnacle to a ship's hull, all salt spray charm and weathered pastels. Our family home was a handsome colonial on a bluff overlooking the bay, a postcard image of coastal prosperity. Tourists would often stop to take pictures of its hydrangeas, spilling in vibrant blues and purples over the white picket fence. They never saw the rot in the floorboards, the quiet decay that permeated every room. My sister, Clara, was the sun around which our family orbited. She was 2 years older, a whirlwind of golden hair, brilliant smiles, and a laugh that could charm birds from the trees. She was the one who got the lead in the school play, the one whose watercolors were framed and hung in the living room, the one whose future was spoken of in glittering, certain terms. I was the moon, pale and orbiting, visible only in her absence, and even then, I only reflected her light. My drawings were tucked into a portfolio under my bed. My good grades were met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear." My presence was tolerated, a necessary, if slightly inconvenient, component of the family portrait. The harm wasn't always loud. In fact, its most potent form was the silence. It was the way my mother, Genevieve, would look straight through me when I tried to speak at the dinner table. It was the way my father, Arthur, would retreat behind his newspaper, his silence a wall that I could never scale. The harm was in the 1,000 tiny dismissals, the constant, unspoken message that I was secondary. Clara's needs were emergencies, mine were inconveniences. Her triumphs were family victories, mine were quiet, solitary acknowledgments. The physical hurts were just punctuation marks in a long, run-on sentence of emotional neglect. A sharp pinch under the table if I took the last bread roll. A playful shove that sent me stumbling down the last 2 steps of the staircase. Each time, it was my fault. I was too sensitive. I was clumsy. I was provoking her. "You know how Clara gets," my mother would say, a sigh of weary resignation in her voice, as if Clara's cruelty was a force of nature, like the tide, and I was foolish for standing in its way. I learned to make myself small, to navigate our home with the quiet stealth of a mouse. I learned the art of invisibility. I moved out at 18 for college and never truly moved back. I built a life for myself in a city 3 hours away, a small but sun-filled apartment above a used bookstore, a quiet job as a graphic designer for a small nonprofit, and a circle of friends who saw me, truly saw me, for who I was. I visited Port Blossom only on major holidays, brief, carefully managed excursions where I would smile, keep my answers short, and retreat into myself until it was time to leave. I thought I had built a life with walls high enough to keep the past at bay. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning. The pipes in my apartment building had burst overnight, flooding the 3 floors below me. My landlord was apologetic but firm. The entire building would need to be evacuated for at least a week for emergency repairs. A hotel was a financial impossibility. My small salary was carefully budgeted, with little room for the kind of catastrophe that leaves you homeless with 2 hours' notice. My best friend, Leah, immediately offered her couch, but her tiny studio was already crowded with her pottery wheels and canvases. I couldn't impose. So, with a heart heavy as a ship's anchor, I did the one thing I had sworn I would never do. I called home. "Of course, darling, you can stay here." My mother's voice was smooth as polished sea glass. "Your room is just as you left it." The lie was so effortless it almost sounded like the truth. My room was not as I left it. It had been converted into Genevieve's project room, my bed replaced with a large cutting table for her quilting hobby, my bookshelf now storing neatly labeled bins of fabric. But I said thank you, my voice tight, and promised to be there by evening. The drive to Port Blossom felt like a journey backward in time. With each mile, the carefully constructed adult I had become began to flake away, revealing the uncertain, anxious girl underneath. The air grew thick with the familiar scent of salt and low tide, a smell that for others meant vacation and peace, but for me, meant holding my breath. The house was, as always, immaculate. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large bay windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent spirits. Clara was there, lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I came in, laden with my overnight bag and a box of my most precious belongings. "Oh, Cora, you're here," my mother said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "Just put your things in the guest room for now. We'll make it work." The guest room was small and stuffy at the back of the house, with a single window that looked out onto the overgrown garden shed. It felt like a space for things you didn't want but couldn't quite throw away. I unpacked my few things, my hands trembling slightly. I was only here for a week. I could survive a week. I would be a ghost, a polite visitor. I would stay out of the way. The first few days were a masterclass in avoidance. I spent my time at the local library, working remotely on my laptop, or taking long, solitary walks along the bluffs, letting the wind whip the tension from my shoulders. I ate after everyone else had finished, and I washed my own dishes, leaving the kitchen as pristine as I'd found it. The conversations were brief and superficial. "How's your little job, dear?" Genevieve asked one evening, not waiting for an answer before turning to Clara. "Clara, darling, tell me again what the CEO of Aura Creative said about your latest campaign." Clara, who worked in public relations, preened. Her career was a source of immense family pride. She was a master of crafting images, both for her clients and for herself. Her life, as presented on social media and in family conversations, was a seamless reel of success, glamour, and effortless achievement. My quiet life of purpose and small joys was, by comparison, a failure. The fragile peace I had brokered was shattered on the fifth night. I had a promising job interview the next morning with a larger design firm, a step up that could finally give me the financial independence I craved. My one good interview blouse was wrinkled from being packed in a hurry. The main laundry room was in the basement, a cold, damp space that always smelled of bleach and regret. I set up the old ironing board under the single, bare light bulb. The iron itself was a heavy, vintage model, chrome and black Bakelite, something my grandmother had owned. It took a long time to heat up, hissing and spitting like a cornered cat. I was carefully pressing the collar when the basement door creaked open. Clara stood at the top of the stairs, backlit by the hallway light, a glass of wine in her hand. Her smile was sharp and knowing. "Playing Cinderella, Cora?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Just ironing a shirt, Clara," I said, not looking at her, focusing on the rhythmic slide of the iron over the fabric. She descended the stairs slowly, her footsteps echoing in the quiet basement. "You know, I've been thinking. It's funny how you always come crawling back when things go wrong in your perfect little life." My pipes burst, Clara. "It's temporary." My heart began to beat a little faster, a familiar drum of anxiety. "Is it?" She took a step closer, her eyes glittering with a familiar, cruel light. "Or is it that you can't stand us being happy without you? You always have to come back and cast your little shadow over everything." "I don't want any trouble," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I have an interview tomorrow." "An interview?" She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "For what? Chief Doodler? You think your little drawings are ever going to amount to anything? You live in a shoebox above a bookstore, Cora. You're nothing." Her words were stones, each one hitting a place that was already bruised. I kept my eyes on the blouse, on the steam rising from the hot metal. "Please, just leave me alone." "You always say that," she sneered, now standing right beside me. "You're so weak. You think being quiet makes you good? It just makes you pathetic." In one swift, fluid motion, she reached out, not for me, but for the iron. She snatched it from my hand. I stumbled back, startled. "What are you doing?" "I'm just reminding you of your place," she said, her smile widening into a predatory grin. Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, she lunged. She didn't slam it against me. It was slower, more deliberate. She pressed the hot, flat plate of the iron against the soft skin of my inner forearm. A sound tore from my throat, a scream of pure, unadulterated agony. The smell of searing fabric and something else, something horribly organic, my own skin, filled the air. The pain was a white-hot explosion, a supernova of nerve endings firing at once. I collapsed to the cold concrete floor, clutching my arm, the world dissolving into a blur of tears and shock. The iron clattered to the floor beside me. Clara stood over me, her expression not of panic or regret, but of cold, chilling satisfaction. Footsteps thundered on the stairs. My mother appeared, her face a mask of annoyance. "What on earth is all that racket?" "She attacked me." Clara cried instantly, her voice a pitch-perfect performance of a startled victim. She pointed a trembling finger at me, writhing on the floor. "She came at me, Mom. I was just defending myself." I tried to speak, to form the words, "No, she burned me," but all that came out was a choked sob. My mother's eyes flickered from Clara's theatrical panic to me, crumpled on the ground, my arm clutched to my chest. She looked at the iron lying on the floor. She saw the truth. I saw it in the flicker of understanding in her eyes, a fleeting moment of recognition before the shutters came down. Her face hardened, her mouth twisting into a familiar line of disdain. She took a step back, pulling her silk robe tighter around herself. "Honestly, Cora," she said, her voice as cold as the basement floor. "You always did know how to make a scene. Clean yourself up. You're getting hysterical over nothing." Hysterical over nothing. The words landed harder than the iron. The burn on my arm was a searing fire, but the coldness in my mother's voice was a void, an absolute zero of love and protection that extinguished the last flickering ember of hope I ever had for them. The pain in my arm was finite. The pain in my soul felt infinite. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It shifted. It was a tectonic plate, grinding into a new position after centuries of pressure. The part of me that had always hoped, always forgiven, always made excuses for them, crumbled into dust. And in its place, something new began to form. It wasn't hatred. It was clarity. A cold, hard, and terrifyingly peaceful clarity. I stopped crying. My breathing, ragged and shallow, began to even out. I slowly, carefully, got to my feet. I held my burned arm against my stomach, the pain a pulsing, rhythmic reminder of what had just happened. I looked at Clara, who was watching me with a flicker of uncertainty, her victory lap cut short by my strange calm. Then I looked at my mother, her arms crossed, her expression one of utter, bored indifference. "I'll be out of your house in 10 minutes, I said, my voice quiet but steady. It didn't tremble. It didn't crack. It was the voice of a stranger. But this time is different. I'm not running away from you." I paused, letting my gaze settle on each of them. "I'm just going to stop letting you be the only ones who tell the story." Genevieve scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic." I gave a small, sad smile. "You taught me that the story is all that matters," I said softly. "I'm just finally ready to write my own." I turned and walked up the basement stairs, not looking back. I left my wrinkled blouse on the ironing board. I left the smell of burned skin and shattered illusions behind me. I went to the stuffy guest room, packed my bags with a calm, methodical purpose, and walked out the front door into the cool, salty night air, leaving the postcard house on the bluff behind me for the last time. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in my life, I knew I was moving in the right direction. The emergency room was out of the question. I knew the narrative that would be spun. I was unstable, accident-prone, looking for attention. Dr. Hansen, who ran the clinic, played golf with my father every second Saturday. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour pharmacy in the next town over, my left hand steering while my right arm throbbed in protest, wrapped in a clean t-shirt from my bag. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I bought burn cream, sterile gauze, and medical tape, paying in cash. In the sterile quiet of the pharmacy's restroom, I tended to the wound. The burn was a raw, angry red, already beginning to blister into a perfect, cruel rectangle, the imprint of the iron. Seeing it there, on my own skin, was surreal. It was evidence. It was a brand. As I carefully dressed the wound, my hands moving with a surgeon's precision, I felt not self-pity, but a strange, steely resolve. This scar would not be a mark of shame. It would be a map. There was only one place I could go. I drove through the sleeping streets until I reached the small, brightly lit apartment complex where Leah lived. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I knocked on her door. She opened it, her face clouded with sleep, which instantly cleared to alarm when she saw me. "Cora? What in God's name happened to you? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I said, my voice finally cracking. "I saw my family." She pulled me inside, into the warm, earthy-smelling chaos of her apartment. Clay dust and the scent of drying paint hung in the air. She sat me down on her worn velvet couch, made me a cup of chamomile tea, and listened. I told her everything, the words spilling out of me in a torrent. I showed her the burn. Leah, who had known me since we were freshmen in college, had heard the stories. She had seen the bruises I'd tried to hide, had fielded the tearful phone calls after holiday visits. But this was different. She looked from my arm to my face, and her expression hardened from sympathy to a quiet, protective fury. "That's it," she said, her voice low. "That is the last time, Cora. We are not letting this go. What do you want to do?" The old Cora would have said, "Nothing. I just want to forget." But the woman sitting on Leah's couch was different. The fire in my arm had burned away the fog of denial. "I don't want revenge," I said slowly, testing the words. Revenge feels like their language. It's loud and destructive. I want accountability. I want the truth to have a voice. Their entire world is built on a beautiful, carefully constructed lie. I want to pull back the curtain. For the next 2 days, Leah's apartment became our command center. She gave me her bed while she slept on the couch, surrounding me with a fortress of support. We didn't just plot, we excavated. We went through my past like archaeologists, digging for artifacts of the truth. I pulled out old journals, their pages filled with the spidery handwriting of a teenage girl detailing humiliations and hurts. We found a saved voicemail on an old phone, my mother's voice, laughing with a friend. "Oh, you know Cora," she'd said. "She bruises if you look at her too hard." Always been so dramatic. We compiled a digital file, photographs of old scars with timestamps, screenshots of Clara's passive-aggressive texts, emails from my father that were masterpieces of non-committal, hands-off parenting. It was a quiet, damning mosaic of years of systemic emotional abuse. "It's not enough to just post this online," Leah said, her brow furrowed in concentration as she scrolled through the evidence. "They'd spin it. They'd say you're unstable. You have to dismantle the structures that give them their power, their reputation, their public image." And so, we began to build a plan, not of attack, but of strategic truth-telling. It was quiet, meticulous, and aimed directly at the pillars that held up their world. The first pillar was Clara. Clara's career at Aura Creative was built on her image as a brilliant, charismatic, and empathetic professional. Her LinkedIn profile was filled with recommendations praising her integrity and innate understanding of people. I knew from her own bragging that her position wasn't just earned, it was facilitated. My mother, a prominent member of Port Blossom's social scene, was good friends with the wife of Aura's CEO. It was a connection Genevieve leveraged often. Using a pseudonym, Iris Thorne, I created a new email address and a temporary website for a fictional artisan candle company. I drafted a professional, compelling project proposal for a branding and PR campaign. The concept was all about radical authenticity and telling transparent stories. I submitted the proposal to Aura Creative, specifically requesting Clara. I wrote, "I have been following Ms. Clara Dane's work for some time and am deeply impressed by her ability to craft narratives that feel both aspirational and deeply human." The bait was taken. A week later, I had a video conference scheduled with Clara. I set up the meeting at Leah's apartment. I wore a sophisticated black turtleneck, glasses I didn't need, and had my hair pulled back in a severe bun. Leah sat just off camera, monitoring a screen recorder. Clara appeared on the screen, her smile dazzling, her backdrop a chic, minimalist office. She hadn't recognized the name, and she didn't recognize me. "Iris, so wonderful to meet you," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "I've read your proposal, and I have to say, I am incredibly intrigued by your vision for the Gilded Wick. This idea of radical authenticity is so of the moment." We talked for 15 minutes about brand identity and market demographics. I played the part of the eager, potential client. Then I leaned in a little closer to my camera. I have some preliminary materials I'd like to share, I said. Just to give you a sense of the kind of raw, transparent storytelling I'm interested in. Of course, she said, beaming. I shared my screen. But instead of mock-ups of candle labels, a single photograph appeared. It was my arm, taken the night of the burn, the red rectangle of the wound stark and undeniable. Clara's smile froze. Her eyes widened, a flicker of confusion followed by dawning horror. What is this? She stammered, her professional composure cracking. This, I said, my voice perfectly level, is a story about authenticity. About what happens behind the beautiful facade. I clicked to the next image, a screenshot of one of her texts to me from a year ago. If you tell anyone what happened at Christmas, I will make you wish you were never born. Then another, a page from my teenage journal describing her pushing me down the stairs. Clara's face had gone from pale to ashen. Who is this? What do you want? She hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I took off the glasses and pulled my hair from the bun, letting it fall to my shoulders. I met her gaze directly through the camera. Hello, Clara, I said softly. You wanted to talk about authentic narratives. Let's talk about ours. She stared, speechless, her mask completely shattered. For a moment, she looked like a terrified child. Then the rage returned. You psycho. You are trying to ruin me. No, I replied calmly. I'm just showing them who you are. The meeting is being recorded, by the way. I believe this falls under unprofessional conduct. Thank you for your time, Ms. Dane. I ended the call. Leah and I sat in silence for a moment, the air humming with what had just transpired. That afternoon, I sent the recording, along with a file of evidence, to the head of HR and the CEO of Aura Creative from my anonymous, Iris Thorne email. The subject line was simple, regarding the integrity of your employee, Clara Dane. 2 days later, a press release from Aura Creative announced they had parted ways with a senior staff member following an internal investigation into conduct that did not align with the company's core values of respect and integrity. Clara's pillar had crumbled. The next one was my mother's. Genevieve Dane's identity was inextricably linked to her role as a community pillar. Her crown jewel was the annual Tidewater Children's Foundation Gala, a lavish affair that raised money for underprivileged youth in the region. She was the chairwoman of the board, the face of the event. It was her stage, her yearly coronation as Port Blossom's most benevolent and compassionate matriarch. This year's theme, ironically, was lighting the way for our children. I bought a single ticket to the gala. It cost a significant portion of my savings, but I considered it an investment. I chose my dress with care, a simple, elegant column of dark emerald green. It was understated but dignified. I wore my hair down, and for the first time, I didn't try to hide the scar on my arm. The burn had healed into a pale, silvery rectangle, a permanent reminder. I let it be visible. The event was held at the Port Blossom Yacht Club, a glittering hall of polished wood and panoramic windows overlooking the moonlit bay. I moved through the crowd of local dignitaries and wealthy patrons, a ghost at the feast. I saw my mother across the room, resplendent in a champagne-colored gown, holding court, laughing, accepting praise for her tireless work. She didn't see me. I was, as always, invisible to her. I waited. I ate a single scallop from a passing tray. I listened to the string quartet. I watched as the donations were tallied on a large screen, climbing higher and higher. Finally, the time came for the chairwoman's address. My mother took the stage to thunderous applause. She stood at the podium, bathed in a warm spotlight, the picture of grace and moral authority. Thank you, she began, her voice radiating warmth. When I look out at all of your generous faces, I am reminded of the profound importance of family, of community, of providing a safe and loving harbor for every child to grow and flourish. She spoke for 10 minutes, weaving a beautiful tapestry of words about compassion, protection, and the sacred duty of parents. At the end, the room rose in a standing ovation. The host of the evening, a local news anchor, came up to the stage to present her with a bouquet of white roses. Genevieve, the host gushed, you are truly an inspiration. A model for mothers everywhere. That was my cue. I moved from the back of the room, walking calmly and deliberately toward the stage. A few people turned to look, a ripple of curiosity moving through the crowd. My mother's smile faltered slightly as she saw me approaching. I didn't say a word. I simply walked up the side steps of the stage. The host looked at me confused. I reached into my small clutch and pulled out a small, elegant silver flash drive. I handed it to the technician sitting at a control board near the stage. "There's a short presentation on here," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified slightly by the nearby microphone. "A tribute. It's called A Child's Harbor." The technician, assuming it was a planned part of the program, took the drive and plugged it in. My mother stared at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. The large screen behind her, which had been showing the Foundation's logo, flickered and changed. The first image appeared, a photograph of a smiling, 8-year-old me, a gap in my teeth, holding a drawing. The room murmured in appreciation. Then, the next image, a close-up of a deep purple bruise on a child's arm, the same arm from the first photo. A gasp rippled through the hall. The slideshow continued, a brutal, silent counter-narrative to my mother's speech. A picture of our perfect family on the porch, followed by a screenshot of Clara's vicious texts. A photo of my mother accepting a community service award, followed by an audio clip, that damning voicemail of her laughing about how easily I bruised. The audio, crystal clear in the suddenly silent room, was devastating. And then, the final image. A high-resolution photograph of the raw, blistered burn on my forearm, taken in the pharmacy bathroom just 2 weeks prior. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a dense, heavy, suffocating silence. Every eye was on the screen, then on my mother, frozen in the spotlight, her face a crumbling facade of shock and exposure. I walked to the podium, stood beside her, and leaned in to whisper, my voice for her ears alone. "You taught me everything I know about appearances, Mother. I just learned to show what's underneath." She didn't run. She simply stood there, as if turned to stone, while the truth of her life's great lie was projected in high definition behind her. I turned and walked off the stage, through the stunned, silent crowd, and out into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The pillar of her reputation had not just crumbled, it had been ground to dust. The fallout was swift and catastrophic. By the next morning, 3 major corporate sponsors had withdrawn their funding from the Tidewater Children's Foundation. The gala, meant to be my mother's triumph, became a local scandal. The foundation's board asked for her immediate resignation. Her social circle evaporated, their invitations drying up, their phone calls going unanswered. Clara, now unemployed and publicly shamed, tried to fight back on social media, posting a tearful video claiming I was a jealous, vindictive liar who had been mentally unstable for years. But it was too late. The evidence was too compelling. My quiet, factual presentation had been far more powerful than her hysterical defense. The comments were brutal. Her followers, once her currency, abandoned her in droves. Within a month, they were both pariahs in the town that had once revered them. Their power, built on image and public perception, was gone. Then came the letter from their lawyer. They were suing me for defamation and infliction of emotional distress. It was a desperate, final grasp for control. I hired my own lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Ms. Garrison. I didn't need to tell her my story, I just showed her the file. She looked it over, her expression growing more resolute with each page. "They don't have a case, Cora," she said. "The truth is an absolute defense against defamation. And their claim of emotional distress is audacious." The preliminary hearing was held in a small, sterile conference room at the courthouse. I walked in alone, wearing a simple gray suit, feeling a strange sense of calm. My mother and Clara arrived together, looking diminished and worn. Genevieve's usual impeccable tailoring was slightly askew. Clara hid behind oversized sunglasses, a shield against a world that was no longer looking at her with admiration. Their lawyer, a blustering man who seemed out of his depth, began with a florid speech about the sanctity of family and the malicious campaign of a troubled daughter. When it was my turn, Ms. Garrison simply stood up and said, "Your Honor, we believe the evidence speaks for itself." She submitted the entire file. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, reviewed the documents in silence. She listened to the audio clip of my mother's voice. She looked at the photograph of the burn. Her face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. She looked up, first at my mother and Clara, then at me. "This is not a case of defamation," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "This is a case of profound and documented abuse. To attempt to use the legal system to further silence your victim is not only frivolous, it's reprehensible. Case dismissed." She slammed her gavel down, the sound echoing the finality of it all. My mother seemed to shrink in her chair. Clara finally took off her sunglasses, and I saw her eyes were red-rimmed, not with remorse, but with the bitter tears of defeat. Walking out of that courthouse, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. The fight was over. The truth was out. But what now? I had spent so much energy deconstructing their world that I hadn't thought about how to build my own. That evening, sitting in Leah's apartment, I realized that tearing down was not enough. I had to build. I had to create something from the ashes. I didn't want my story to end with their destruction. I wanted it to begin with my creation. The idea came to me not in a flash of inspiration, but as a quiet, steady dawn. I thought about the silence, the specific, insidious nature of the harm that happens within families, the kind no one wants to talk about because it's messy and complicated. The kind that leaves invisible scars far deeper than any burn. I spent the next 6 months channeling all my energy, all my focus, into a new project. I used my design skills, my experience with the nonprofit world, and the small inheritance my grandmother had left me, the one my parents didn't know about, to lay the groundwork. I reached out to therapists, lawyers, and social workers I had met through my old job. I created the Lighthouse Project. It was a nonprofit initiative dedicated to providing resources for adults healing from familial abuse, specifically the quiet kinds: emotional neglect, gaslighting, sibling abuse, and narcissistic parenting. It offered subsidized therapy, support groups, legal aid referrals, and temporary housing grants. Its name was deliberate. A lighthouse doesn't fight the storm. It stands firm, weathering the winds and the waves, and it shines a light to guide others safely to shore. Our website launched with a simple, anonymous story, mine. I wrote about the feeling of being a ghost in your own home, about the slow erosion of self-worth, and about the moment a physical burn sparked an internal fire. I didn't use names or locations, but the truth of it resonated. The response was overwhelming. Emails and messages poured in from all over the country. People shared their own stories of silent suffering, of golden child siblings and indifferent parents. They thanked me for giving a voice to a pain they thought they were alone in. The project grew faster than I ever could have imagined. We received grants. We hired staff. My little idea, born from so much pain, was becoming a beacon for hundreds, then thousands of people. I moved to a new city, a quiet place nestled in the foothills of a mountain range, and ran the project from a small, sunny office. I had built a new life, one of purpose and peace, a life that was entirely my own. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, almost a year after the gala, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had a Port Blossom area code. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello." There was a long silence on the other end, then a quiet, broken voice. "Cora." It was Clara. I saw your project," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "The lighthouse. That's you, isn't it?" "Yes," I said softly. "I lost everything," she whispered, the words raw with self-pity. "My job, my friends. Mom doesn't leave the house. You destroyed us." I listened, my heart calm and steady. The old anger, the old pain was gone. In its place was a vast, quiet space of healing. "No, Clara," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You didn't lose everything. You lost the things that were never real to begin with. The applause, the image, the reputation. That's all they were. What's real is still there, waiting for you to find it." I had to do the same. She was silent, perhaps waiting for me to yell, to gloat, to hang up. I did none of those things. I have to go, I said finally. I wish you peace on your journey, Clara. I truly do. I ended the call. I didn't feel closure because closure implies an ending. What I felt was a beginning. I stood up and walked to the window of my office. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a brilliant light over the green, wet world. They had tried to burn me down, to reduce me to ash. They didn't understand that fire can also be used to forge. It can burn away impurities, leaving behind something stronger, something purer. They had branded my skin, but in doing so, they had inadvertently illuminated my soul. I was no longer a shadow, no longer a reflection. I was the lighthouse. And my light was my own.